Metal Gear Solid starts itself off by giving you a very important decision. Do you want to watch 25 minutes of briefing files, or do you actually want to start doing what you're here to do? Play the fucking game. The briefing files give you some extra information on the background of almost every character that's in the story, but they also have some important details in them that you wouldn't know about if you didn't go through them. One such detail is that Snake was pretty much blackmailed into accepting this mission. Campbell says that for a reason that we'll talk about later, Snake would accept the mission even if you didn't blackmail him, but he still fucking does it. I guess he just wanted to play it safe. This whole thing is revealed in a hidden briefing file that you can only see if you get in the briefing file menu for the first time, watch through a single file and then exit the menu. The game basically treats it as if Snake tried to refuse the mission because you decided to not listen to any more of the briefing tapes, which is pretty cool. I don't understand why they're cut up the way they are instead of just being a continuous single cutscene though. On one hand, this allows you to pick and choose the information you want or take a break in between listening to the files. But on the other hand, if you want to listen to everything, it just becomes an annoyance. I think it's fair to assume that the majority of people who would listen to the shit would want to hear the whole thing from beginning to end. So cutting the files up like this mostly just inconveniences everybody that's actually interested in them. What makes them even more needlessly annoying to go through is that some of them are cut up in a very retarded way. Some of them are like 10 seconds long, so sometimes you select a briefing file, watch it for 10 seconds, and then get kicked back to the menu in order to select the next one. They could have just allowed you to pause them if they wanted the player to be able to take a break, or they could have left the files as they are, but also given you the option to watch through them fully without getting booted back to the menu. I know that we're starting this one off with a nitpick, but needlessly annoying stuff like this bothers me because it's really easy to improve without sacrificing anything.
That was quite a cocktail. Anything else in there?
Those nanomachines will also keep your Codex batteries charged up.
I guess I can call you when I'm ready to go on a diet.
I like how when Snake asks if there was anything else in the vaccine after Naomi has listed off everything other than Fox dye, she dodges the question. I'm not sure if it's just a dialogue quirk or not, but if it's intentional, then it's a really cool detail. Watch out, Snake, there's AIDS in that needle. When Campbell talks about Meryl, we see her face and her full name, both of which are identical to Meryl from Police Notes, a 1994 game directed by Kojima as well. The characters share a few more similarities, like the foxhound tattoos on their arms and the black tank top, but nothing more significant than that. One of the most unfortunate differences between them is that you can't touch Meryl's boobs and make them jiggle in MGS. There's plenty of other Police Notes references in the game too. During Otachel's speech about him being a mecha weeb, we see some of the anime cutscenes from Police Notes. He even has a poster of it too. At the end of MGS1, Meryl gets a new orange jacket that looks like the one that Dave Forrest, another character from Police Notes, wears throughout that game.
Well, our gene therapy process is almost completely automated. And besides that, they're all geniuses with IQs over 180.
Yeah, these are the guys that have an IQ that rivals that of some of the smartest people in history. Putting this line in the game when you know that the enemy AI is pretty fucking stupid, realistically speaking, is a bad move. It only makes the writing look that much more goofy. So let's finally start the actual fucking game. First off, you have the option to choose your difficulty. One of MGS's best qualities is that your experience on higher difficulties will be quite different from the one you can have on normal and lower. And if you're up to the challenge, chances are that it won't be a bad one either. In some ways it can even be better. I'll mostly be talking about how the game plays on normal and extreme, with the only thing I have to say about the easier difficulties is that you get an exclusive silenced MP5 with infinite ammo if you play the integral version and choose very easy. It's basically maximum baby mode, but I guess some people need that shit, so it's not a bad thing to have as an option.
Stay alert. He'll be through here. I know it.
Liquid's first few lines in the game hint at the fact that he was planning to use Snake from the very beginning, which is a nice detail. The game is full of fun details like this one in both the gameplay and the story, which along with some of its other aspects, makes replaying it a few times very much worth it. I've played through the game fully about 6 times now, and I kept finding out new things about it even on my last playthrough. After Snake gets out of the water, you get your first codec call.
The frequency is 140.85. When you want to use the codec, push the select button.
Instead of trying and failing to mask the obviousness of this tutorial by giving it the context of an in-universe conversation, the game makes its intention to explain itself obvious to the point of fully breaking the fourth wall. Having the characters in the game outright tell you to press the select button with voice lines is so absurd that it makes it easy to entirely separate from normal in-universe dialogue, and thus not completely ruin immersion. This, in reality, means that the player has to do a bit of mental gymnastics in order to remain fully immersed, and that's something that, if you so desire, you can fully refuse to do and call it out as bullshit. In that case, more power to you, as you're technically right, but I would still say that doing it this way is more preferable than the obvious to the player half-measure way that many other games have decided is the way to go. Cause if it's gonna be obvious that the in-game characters are directly speaking to you as a player, you might as well not try to hide it, cause you know the player is gonna see through it anyway. And also, you've gotta remember, no half-measures.
You in Mississippi now, nigga.
After that, you get to play around the small area until the elevator comes back. The game introduces a few of its more unique mechanics here, which is cool and all, but the issue is that most of these mechanics are extremely underused throughout the rest of the game. If you step in a puddle of water, nearby guards will hear the sound it made and come over to investigate. The mechanic of guards being alerted depending on what snake is stepping on is used to make a small number of sections in the game a bit harder, but never in any truly thoughtful way. In this room, nothing prevents you from walking around the section of the ground which causes your footsteps to make noise, and walking around it is extremely easy to do by itself as well. The only other sections of the game in which this mechanic can be an obstacle are the ones that have you walking around on scaffolding, but in every instance of them all you have to do is deal with one guard, which also becomes extremely easy once you have the silencer. And if you're exploring around Shadow Moses as one usually would, then you probably have that silencer in every such situation. The footprint mechanic appears exactly once after this, and it's in the area that's right after the elevator. On my first ever playthrough, I actually got caught by the guard there because of it, but after that I've just used it to fuck around with him or ignored it completely. Both of these mechanics have a lot of potential for making the level design more engaging, but they're barely utilized in that way. Furthermore, it's easy to imagine that the combined use of all mechanics I've been talking about could result in some really interesting and engaging levels that still wouldn't require you to be a master of stealth in order to get through, and so wouldn't be likely to cause too much frustration. Another mechanic that's only seen in the first area of the game and is also more of a fun detail is your ability to dive into water if you're in alert mode. Once you do it, the 180 IQ guards will completely lose you, which gives you an easy way to essentially restart if you fuck up. I'm assuming that this could have been put here in order to help new players out, but since nobody tells you that you can do this shit, and since it's unlikely that you even find out that you can do it, I think it's more likely that it's just another one of those fun details that this Jigga likes to put in his games. After you get on the elevator, Snake removes his mask and you get to see his handsome polygon face for the first time in the game. Apparently, for the PC release, the devs wanted Snake's model to have actual eyes, but since that shit looked like it was taken straight out of a shitty creepypasta, Kojima decided against it. Now it's time for another codec conversation. Mei Ling explains how your Soliton radar works, but what she forgets to say is that it completely trivializes every stealth section in the game, which also makes it so useful that you might end up looking at the radar more than you're looking at the actual game sometimes. Being able to see the guards' vision cones means that if you want to avoid getting caught, it will always be better to look at the radar instead of the actual game, because the radar simply just gives you more important and concrete information. Depending on what type of player you are, a single glance here and there might be enough. For a lot of other players, the best strategy might be to keep their eyes glued to the radar as much as possible in order to minimize mistakes. It's fair to assume that in any section of the game that allows for a stealthy approach, these players could have spent a significant amount of time essentially just playing as a white dot trying to avoid yellow cones on a small screen that's in the corner of the actual game. This obviously isn't great for keeping the player immersed and simplifies the stealth gameplay way too much. It also gets rid of a lot of its tension. For example, there's no tension in running in front of a guard because you know exactly where his vision cone ends. There's no need to check corners because one look at the radar tells you if there's somebody there. The stealth sections really aren't hard or complex enough to warrant giving the player so much concrete information. On the contrary, the game is perfectly playable without the Soliton radar and can even be more enjoyable. You can test this out for yourself by playing on hard or extreme difficulties, in which the Soliton radar is completely disabled. It's a much more immersive experience, because the lack of a radar forces you to obtain the information that it will usually provide by looking at and playing the actual game, meaning that you're gonna be leaning against walls and using first-person view much more. It's a theory of mine that it's possible that the game was originally designed to be played without the radar, because of how much effort clearly went into the design of those two abilities. The camera angle that you get when you hug almost any wall or object in the game always gives you a perfect view of what's around the corner, and I'm assuming that all these angles were placed by hand, which would be insane if I'm right, as there's quite a lot of them in the game. Also, in first-person mode you can lean to the left and to the right, so you can look around corners without the help of a camera angle as well. Considering the possible negative effects of the radar on the gameplay experience and the thoughtful design behind the aforementioned mechanics, which make the radar unnecessary, I'd say the game would have been better off without it. Removing it would make the game a bit harder on normal difficulty and below, but the interesting thing about MGS1 difficulty as a whole is that people only seem to find it hard when they're still getting used to the controls. Every anecdote about its difficulty that I've stumbled upon is about how the player finds the game challenging because because they're finding the controls to be unintuitive, and not because they're having a hard time dealing with guards or anything like that. This leads me to assume that most players might find the game to be quite easy once they get used to the controls, and so removing the radar in order to make the game more immersive on every difficulty won't hurt the experience even for those that would end up finding the game to be a little hard. People would just have to get used to hugging walls and using first person view more, and unless you're retarded, that shouldn't be too hard to do.
By the way, sorry to disappoint you, but I did manage to smuggle out my smokes.
How did you do that?
In my stomach.
Snake was so addicted to the cigs that he swallowed a whole pack of them and yacked them up later. Even a Balkan kid that started smoking when he was 6 wouldn't do that shit. Maybe he should have gotten the codename Deep Throat. After this, for about a minute and a half, the game just starts playing itself for you. Another issue I have with it in general, and that I'll be talking about throughout the review, is that it lacks trust in the player's intelligence in a lot of situations. Right here, they could have allowed you to use the binoculars and figure out all the entry points and guards' locations by yourself, but you're treated like a baby that can't do this shit by itself instead. If they wanted to give you guidance, they could have just had the colonel tell you that there are 2 air ducts you can go through and that the front door won't open for you. That would have been enough. There's no need to hold my fucking hand and point everything out to me. It's pretty cool that you can hear the waves crashing into the island. Why is Snake so fucking surprised by the surveillance camera? Did he expect Shadow Moses to have no security? Fucking dumbass. Depending on what vent you enter Shadow Moses through, your experience will be a bit different. Entering the first floor vent will allow you to see a cutscene in which these 2 goons talk about the broken door on the 2nd floor. If you don't have the SOCOM, they also talk about their supply of SOCOM pistols. And if you've activated alert mode outside, they also mention that an intruder has been spotted. You also end up encountering some Alaskan field mice and having a conversation with Miller about them, after which you have to swim through a little bit of water. I kept calling people on my codec while I was underwater because I was hoping Snake would go but unfortunately that doesn't happen. If you enter through a 2nd floor vent, you can hear these guys talking about the DARPA Chief, Meryl, and the ventilation shafts. If you've been spotted, they also mention that there's an intruder that's using stealth and has already killed 3 people, but they're actually talking about Greatfox here, not you. Once you make it out of the vents, you get the codec call before you can even look around properly. The colonel tells you that there's supposed to be an elevator somewhere around here and that you should use it. Again, all he really needs to tell me is that my goal is to get to the floor below this one. I can figure the rest of the shit out on my own. The same thing happens when you get to the ladder for the prison cell air ducts. Apparently, they decided that the player needs a gameplay interrupting codec code that tells them that they need to press the action button in order to climb up a ladder. People are not that fucking stupid. The game, at this point, has even established that the circle button serves as an action button that allows you to interact with things like the elevator, so you should be able to trust that the player will figure out this ladder shit on their own. Even if there's a player that can't do it, that guy will be beyond help, so you're just wasting time with these calls and interrupting gameplay for no reason. You might argue that this isn't a big problem, but as you go through the game, you see that this happens enough to be an issue. Some of it is even worse in terms of handholding. If you go in and out of this vent, like I want to go in and out of Mei Ling, Meryl will switch between different exercises every time you get to her cell, and she will eventually remove her pants too. Horny ass fucking guy. After you talk to this black guy and watch him have a heart attack because of all the fried chicken, Meryl beats down her future husband and opens up the cell for you. If you lean against this wall here, you can see her waiting to ambush you, and she even shows up on a radar. If Snake doesn't have the SOCOM, the next cutscene plays out a bit differently, with him grabbing her FAMAS instead of pointing his pistol at her, which is a cool detail. A bunch of guards then show up, and you and Meryl have to take them down. On my first attempt at an extreme playthrough, I actually had to restart here. On extreme, there's a very small amount of rations that you can find throughout the environment, so if you need them, you have to farm them from the guards. I didn't think of that when I started this attempt, so I ended up with 1 HP and no rations, and got completely BTFO'd by these guys every time. You can also only hold 1 ration at a time for the whole game, so if you get on low health later on when your HP bar is bigger, you can end up spending a decent amount of time grinding for them. If they're gonna let you grind for rations, they might as well have placed a ration or 2 in every area with a guard in it, as functionally it wouldn't matter if you got it as a drop or a hand placed item. One cool mechanic that you can use here and are also given a decent number of chances to use throughout the rest of the game is the domino effect of the throw. If you throw one guy into an another, the second guy will also get knocked down, which is very useful as a form of crowd control and makes the throw a viable option in some fights. Later on in the game, during the Akira elevator section, you can also use it to throw these guys off the lift and kill them instantly, which is pretty useful as they're otherwise very tanky, but doing it successfully requires some good positioning and timing, so it's more of a reward for skilled gameplay instead of a trivializing solution. Once you defeat all the guards, you can go back to the cell room and crouch down next to the naked guard to get a unique camera angle. Almost every dead body in the game has a couple of these camera angles. They even differ depending on which side of the body you crouch down next to, with one of them here giving you a perfect view of the guard's cheeks. In the Japanese version he has underwear, but I guess the people behind the American release thought that having him be buck naked would be way funnier. Your next stop is the armory room. The floor traps here are an improvement from the ones in Metal Gear 1 and 2. The sound that they make just a little before they open up can give you enough time to react if you're just walking around, but if you get into first person mode just as you unknowingly step on one, it's very likely that you won't be able to react. My solution to this problem would be to warn the player about Shadow Moses having traps, somewhere during the beginning of the game maybe. Doing it this way would completely hand over responsibility for getting caught by traps to the player, as they would have been given enough reason to look for and be careful of them. Before you go and fight OCELOT, you can actually fuck with him a little bit from outside by throwing grenades into the room or shooting Baker with a blicky. If you kill Baker here, OCELOT will start seething. OCELOT's calling you a dumbass as if he isn't a complete retard himself. His boss fight is pretty simple, but can still be quite engaging, especially on extreme. There's a lot of ways you can go about fighting him, which is great. Other than just shooting him with your gun, you can use stun grenades, C4 and even normal grenades if you're good enough to throw them without blowing the whole place up. The normal way of fighting him has you chasing him around the room and taking a shot at him whenever he starts reloading, which you can expect to happen whenever the bullet counter that's tracking his remaining bullets reaches 0. It would have been cool if on hard difficulty the ammo counter for OCELOT's fight was removed after his first reload. That way, the player would have to count OCELOT's bullets themselves, which would make the fight more engaging. Once you get used to his movement, you'll be able to hit him with some diagonal shots, which can feel pretty rewarding. And you're doing all of this shit while Baker is moaning for some reason. His moans are even worse in the cutscene before the fight.
He's alive. You're the Arms Tech president, Kenneth Baker, right? Don't worry, I'm here to save you.
No, don't touch it.
No, don't touch it, I'm still edging. After the fucker finally stops moaning when you defeat OCELOT, he somehow ends up surviving an explosion that's right next to him. The same explosion knocked OCELOT into the wall and he wasn't even as close as Baker was. Whatever, I guess. Grey Fox then waltzes onto the scene, cuts off OCELOT's arm and starts spazzing out until he leaves. Baker then essentially gives you your next objectives and treats you to a speech about nuclear waste, which is one way Kojima shares his stance on nuclear weapons through the game. MGS1's message about nukes is perfectly clear. They're bad, but its message about nuclear disarmament specifically is a little harder to pinpoint because of how contradictory it is within the context of the series up to this point. In Metal Gear 2, we see that even when the whole world has agreed to disarm all nukes, there is always the possibility of someone with enough power popping up and creating a new nuclear weapon and therefore becoming a bit of a problem for the rest of the whole world. That means that at this point in the franchise, complete disarmament was established to be a non-solution, because even if everybody somehow agrees to forget about that whole nuclear weapons thing, they always come back in one way or another, because humans essentially curse themselves for eternity by obtaining the knowledge required to completely destroy each other, and therefore own the whole world with the power of a single weapon, as long as nobody else has it. Logically, this leads us to accepting nuclear deterrence theory, but MGS1 is seemingly against that. We see the anti-deterrence position expressed clearly by Nastasia. She goes on and on about how nuclear deterrence has prevented the elimination of nuclear weapons, which, according to her, we're fated to use against each other again someday, as long as we still have access to them. Basically, she's saying that the nuclear deterrence theory will undoubtedly be the cause of humanity's downfall at some point in the future, and the only way to prevent that would be complete nuclear disarmament. Two entirely opposing viewpoints are expressed here, which can be interpreted as either Kojima being a bit confused on where he stands regarding the issue, as he's battling between accepting deterrence and naively but understandably wishing that nukes could somehow just disappear, so the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki never get the chance to be repeated. Or it can be interpreted as being contradictory in order order to hammer in the fact that nuclear weapons are here to stay. Nastasha believes in nuclear disarmament as a solution, but other than her character, everything else in the game and the series points to the fact that it just won't work. Looking at the final message of the game with the first interpretation in mind, makes it look like a call for nuclear reduction and disarmament, despite the fact that these two things will never happen, which is a good-natured but ultimately naive message. The second interpretation will suggest a more coherent message. It allows for these final words to be read as a somber statement of the fact that nuclear weapons won't be going anywhere anytime soon, and the threat that they pose to humanity's existence will always hang over our heads whether we like it or not. It's not a very profound message, but it successfully ties into MGS1's central theme, which is about how we deal with the things that we can't directly control in our lives. More about that later though, cause now we gotta go 1v1 a fucking tank. Before you get there, you have to pass through a couple of these infrared lasers, and the game does something here that I wish it did more. And by that I mean actually letting you figure shit out on your own. If you've got the thermal vision goggles here, you can just put them on and make your way through. If you missed out on picking them up, you'll still be able to see the lasers if you light up a cigarette. If you call Nastasha in this section, she will outright tell you to use the cigarettes, but since her codec call isn't forced on you, you have the chance to figure it out without any help. It would have been even better if Nastasha just gave you a hint rather than spoon feeding you the solution. I guess that the game's retard-proof design philosophy wouldn't allow for that. This codec call also reveals that Snake's cigarettes are smokeless and that he's actually blowing out smoke in order to see the lasers, which is a cool detail that I only found out about quite recently. It might also be a reference to the smokeless cigarettes in Police Notes. Really hope that game gets ported and officially released on modern platforms, because it's a really cool game and also because the bomb diffuser section made me laugh harder than any other game I've played. Once you pass through the laser and get to the snowfield, you can see that the tank boss fight is foreshadowed by the tracks that the tank left in the snow, which is pretty cool. Taking a few steps forward makes Greatfox call you in order to warn you about the mines, but Mr. Deep Throat is apparently quite slow on the dial. A bit too late, bud. Not being well versed in United States history, it was only recently that I looked into the Watergate scandal and found out where the Deep Throat codename comes from. And yeah, it comes from sucking dick. The informant that snitched on Richard Nixon was nicknamed Deep Throat after the 1972 movie of the same name, which blew up in popularity, and it's about a woman that found out that her clitoris is in her throat. I'm not making this shit up. Having Greatfox call himself Deep Throat as a reference to his role as an informant for the player is pretty cool, but I'm not sure if Kojima knew where the name comes from and how ridiculous it sounds in English, or maybe he just knew and he didn't give a fuck. The tank boss fight can be pretty fun once you know what you're doing, but getting there can be a bit confusing, especially on extreme. Your grenades have to land either next to the gunner or inside the tank, and the best way to get them to land there is to throw them while standing still, because throwing them while running around makes your throws more inaccurate, which you just have to figure out through trial and error. The tank's movement may also be a problem, as it can run you over or make you miss your grenade throws. You can also fuck off to the other side of the arena and start shooting tank rounds at you. What you can do to prevent that shit is plant mines, use C4, or throw grenades at its tracks in order to destroy them, and prevent it from moving around too much. You can figure out that you can do that through trial and error or by calling Nastasha, but even if you don't, you shouldn't have too much trouble with it on normal once you get used to throwing the grenades and moving around. The boss fight is on a whole nother level on extreme though. Destroying the tracks becomes a must, because if you don't, the tank will be on the move constantly. On top of that, running while you're throwing a grenade will make the throw even more inaccurate than it will on normal, and that's an even bigger issue because the gunner's hitbox seems to be much smaller on extreme. In my experience on extreme, unless the grenade is right next to him, it won't deal damage once it explodes, even if it looks like he's in the blast radius. An issue with this fight is that once you destroy the tank's tracks, it becomes piss easy to finish up the rest of the fight, even on extreme. The fight can be a lot more fun if you let the tank move freely, as having to predict its movements and move accordingly yourself adds on another layer of depth to the fight. But since its movement is so unpredictable, you're forced to destroy its tracks if you want to avoid unfair damage. The fight would be much better if the tank's movement was more predictable and its tracks couldn't be destroyed. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that in the very beginning of the fight, you're far away enough from the tank that it can shoot you with tank rounds. In order to deal with this, you have to throw a chaff grenade to disable the tank sensors or some shit, which is way too simple of a solution and brings me to another big problem. Too much of the game's challenges can be nullified with chaff grenades, which essentially turns those challenges into mindless time wasters. Chaff grenades solve everything. Getting shot at by a tank, throw a chaff grenade. Getting fucked up by Greatfox, throw a chaff grenade. Having to deal with cameras and sentries, throw a chaff grenade. Feeling unfulfilled in your daily life and underappreciated by the people around you, throw a chaff grenade. All these problems that could have otherwise been interesting to deal with had more thought been put into their design are all solved by going into the weapons menu, selecting the chaff grenades and throwing one, which requires no thought and gets boring after the second time you do it. I really don't think there's anybody who enjoys doing this shit. I can only see people liking them because they allow you to get some free hits on Greatfox and Metal Gear Rex, but the way they do it is by completely disabling the bosses, which means that they're straight up allowing you to not engage with the boss's mechanics and not have to overcome the challenges that they pose. The game is easy enough already and even has an easy difficulty and a very easy one on the Integral version, so I don't think there's anybody that really needs them in these fights. The same goes for all the cameras and sentries in the game. Instead of having to study their movements and carefully pass through them, you can just throw a chaff grenade and scratch your balls until it explodes and allows you to walk through. Unless you fuck around and waste your chaff grenades or don't pick up any items, you'll be able to do this to every camera and sentry in the game, because you're given enough of them to last you a whole playthrough without running out. You could say that using chaff grenades to avoid most cameras and sentries or to have an easier time against Greatfox and Rex is optional, meaning that I can choose to not use them in those situations and they shouldn't affect my experience that much. But while that is true for myself or any other player like me, I'd argue that the average player won't do anything that makes the game harder for themselves, which means that they would be missing out on engaging with some things that might have made their experience more enjoyable, and this is something that the developers should have been aware of. On that note, why even place and implement cameras and sentries when you're always gonna allow the player to completely circumvent them by using a chaff grenade? What's even worse is that some sections of the game are designed around their use. The problems that you can menially solve with chaff grenades and nothing else could have instead been problems that are engaging and interesting to deal with. Maybe something that requires a little more thought than playing with your cock does, but that's just not the case. The designers apparently decided that having to go up and down a tower while throwing chaffs every few seconds is an experience worth having. What's even more fun is that if you die in the elevator with the invisible guys, you're forced to go down the whole tower again and re-experience the riveting gameplay of throwing chaff G. Fuck you. After you completely bend over the tank, Snake just leaves as if he doesn't know that Vulcan Raven was inside it. He saw him pop out of the tank and yet for some reason decides that it isn't time to deal with him yet, I guess. You then get to the tank section where you can't use your weapons because you might cause a plutonium leak. Thankfully I can still use my fucking chaff grenade. If you call Miller while we're walking around on a type of ground that makes your footsteps louder, he'll explain how stalking works. Snake says that he just can't do it. I guess that this is a meta joke about the slow walk feature not being implemented, which is kinda funny. Miller then says that an alternative is to wear your socks over your shoes. That's how I always wear them. Your next objective is finding Otacon, but it's always better to drop by this floor first so you can get the Nikita launcher. You need it for this section here, but before you get to use it, you have to go through a useless codec call. Deep Throat directly tells you everything that the short cutscene before the call already perfectly communicated to you using visual language. I still think that it isn't retard proof enough though. They should have had Kojima come to your house so he can personally tell you that the floor is electrified. Controlling the Nikita's missiles can serve as a nice change of pace. That's also quite engaging because you have to manage your oxygen bar as well as the timer of the missile, all while controlling it properly and making good use of its boost mechanic. When you finish up playing with rockets, you get a free visit to Jack the Ripper's art gallery. A cool detail here is that 2 of Greatfox's victims will still glow red when you look at them using the thermal vision goggles. They'll be completely dead by the time you go through the room again. Now we'll be fighting Greatfox, but first we have to hear what he's got to say.
How can you compete with that? How can you compete? How could a woman compete with robotic top? And how could a man compete with a pelvis, let me think of a word for this. The pelvis dominator. That can actually change its actual dick size and temperature of its cock, of its robotic cock, to please a woman. And would you really, how many of you guys would get mad if you came home and your wife was just getting pounded by the cyborg BBC?
Zanzibar Land really fucked this guy up. His boss fight is pretty straightforward, but also a bit more mechanically demanding than anything else in the game up to this point, which makes the fight more engaging. For a few seconds after every one of his attacks or acrobatics, he will be left completely open, which leads me to believe that the best tactic for this fight is to take a turn-based approach where you wait for him to do something, go in for a single combo and then rinse and repeat. Once you get used to the fight, you can start manipulating his AI by waiting for him behind walls that he's likely to jump over and leave himself open. begin. This phase of the fight will mostly consist of him chasing you and you baiting his swirl kick out, with the occasional misjudgment of the distance between you that will lead to you getting hit. A trick that I've already mentioned is using chaff grenades against him, but the interesting thing about them here is that you can also use them without even throwing one of them. When you pull them out in front of him, he'll get surprised for a second and drop his guard. It's like flashing somebody, but you're showing your chaff grenade instead of your penis. This phase plays out pretty similarly on Extreme, except that he's much more spastic now and will shoot out swirling kicks almost immediately after recovering sometimes, which along with his vastly improved tracking actually makes the move impossible to dodge after you get knocked down in some cases. Thankfully it's not likely to happen too much, and since the fight is otherwise completely skill based, it shouldn't be a problem for anybody that set out to beat the game on Extreme. The second phase has you playing hide and seek with him, because his mind has regressed that much. I don't have anything to say about this phase because I'm saving my thoughts for the hide and seek review. Right after that one I'll be reviewing other games that I've played as a kid, like Tag and Soggy Biscuit. His third phase has him instant transmissioning right behind you and trying to punch you, which might surprise you the first time but is easily dealt with after that. This is a fun reference to his boss fight in Metal Gear 2, in which you can only fight him with your melee moves, and Snake's move list consists of a single punch in that game. These phases don't play out much differently on Extreme, so we'll be moving on to his final phase, the complete meltdown. This isn't really a phase, but it might be the part of the fight that has got me closest to dying the most, because I always forget about the wonky hitbox of his mind-broken blasts. Once you get a few shots on him here, the fight is over. Grey Fox exploded when you beat him in Metal Gear 2, but was somehow revived, then drugged and experimented on for 4 years before he came to Shadow Moses. It's clear that he's losing control of himself, but also still fighting to keep some of it. Seeing as how he runs off and how the dialogue in the Codeco after the fight has Snake saying that they'll probably fight again, you know that the next time you meet him he might be fully lost, and so you'll be forced to kill him. After that conversation, Otagel pops out of the locker and starts talking about nukes and anime. Turns out that Metal Gear's nuclear capability wasn't a part of his design, and that he didn't know about it until now. With his grandfather being a part of the Manhattan Project and his father being born on the day of the Hiroshima bomb, this incident reinforces his belief in the idea that his family has the curse of nuclear weapons written into their DNA. It sounds a bit fucking stupid when he says it like that, but the idea is that he's accidentally perpetuated the cycle that his family is cursed by. He was blind to the lack of control he has over Metal Gear's creation, because he really wanted to make a fucking Gundam. That's why this whole thing happened, and now it's on him to either continue perpetuating the cycle or gain control and break free from it. The only question I have here is why is the way that Snake's sitting on Otagon's desk during this cutscene so fucking zesty? Makes it look like he's got some sugar in his tank, like he's batting for the other team or sitting on the other side of the table. You know, like he enjoys having a cock shoved in his anus. It's time to go look at Meryl's ass. That's what the game tells you to do, but I've always found it easier to identify her by her footsteps, which for some reason sound much different than the ones of the actual guards. If you go into the women's bathroom a few seconds after Meryl does, she won't have enough time to put her pants on, which is a pretty cool detail if you ask me. Since she doesn't get much time in the spotlight after this, her thematic struggle is almost completely wrapped up in this conversation. Since she thinks that her father died in the battlefield when she was really young, she tried to deal with that by becoming a soldier like him in order to understand him better, but she now realizes that she was using her past as an excuse to not take control of her life in the present, which is an interesting twist on the game's central theme. A tragedy that's completely out of your control may happen in your life, but you don't have to let it shape the direction of your future. That's some real shit. Snake's character also gets expanded on a bit during this cutscene, but I'll say more about that when we start nearing the end. For now, you have to go to the commander's room, but you can fuck with Meryl a bit first. If you beat her up or shoot her, she'll start chasing you, and if you let her catch you, she'll slap the fuck out of you. She also has some dialogue if you stare at her in first person, and because she's really shy, if you do it for long enough, she'll even start turning red. Another thing you can do here is sit on your ass and do nothing until she starts getting mad at you. I guess she just can't wait to get beaten up during the next boss fight.
Snake, how do you like me?
What the?
Do you like me? Hold me, Snake.
What's wrong?
Oh, hurry, hurry. Make love to me. Oh, Snake, I want you.
Who's that?
I'm pretty sure that this was inspired by the scene in Scarface where Tony's sister asks him if he wants to fuck her. Before you get control of your character, you of course have to sit through a codec call in which the colonel tells you that Meryl is being controlled and you need to knock her out instead of killing her. Thanks for that, Colonel. I would have immediately shot her in the head for pointing a gun at me if you hadn't told me that. After you knock her out, Psycho Mantis shows himself and starts doing all sorts of tricks. He'll comment on the amount of times you have saved your game, your ability to avoid traps and detection, the amount of deaths you have, and he also comment on your skin color. Next, he'll read your memory card and mention some specific games if you have them on your system. The games he'll call out by name are Suikoden, Azure Dreams, and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. He'll also say that you like Konami games and role-playing games if you have any of the ones listed here on your memory card. He has even more dialogue in the Japanese version, with the most interesting one having a Kojima voice cameo and requiring you to have saved data from both Snatcher and Police Notes. The final thing he can do is vibrate your controller, which he'll only do if you have a DualShock. After this, he'll scream blackout and leave you staring at a black screen with the word Hideo in the top right corner. I wonder how many people actually fell for this shit when the game was I'm pretty sure I just got you. That feeling that you just had was probably similar to what some people fighting Mantis experienced in 1998. Fourth wall breaking shit like this is pretty cool as long as it isn't overused, and I think that MGS1 uses it just enough that it can keep being surprising and charming every time it happens. What's even more fun is that you need to switch controller ports in order to even do damage to Mantis. I don't see how you could figure this one out by yourself, so it's a good thing that the Colonel eventually tells you about it if you call him enough times during the fight. Another good thing about the fight is that there's an alternative way to disable Mantis' invincibility that doesn't require you to switch controller ports. You can never know whose friend went crazy and yanked out the controller hard enough to ruin the second port, so this is really good. What really isn't great about this alternative way though is that you need to die to Mantis at least once before you can use it. Meaning that if you can't switch ports, you're forced to die at least once during your playthrough, which is really fucked. After you die to him once, you can call the Colonel and get this codec call.
Something that looks like a statue on both sides of the room?
Yeah. You mean those things with their faces all wrapped up in leather bands?
Yes. Attack those statues to uncover their faces.
Why?
Those statues were modeled after Mantis' real face. Mantis despises the sight of his own face. If he suddenly sees his own disfigured face staring at him, it might break his concentration.
Snake, if you destroy the faces of those statues, you should be able to disturb Mantis' psychic powers.
He never even gets the chance to see his face though. Once you shoot at a statue, his head gets completely destroyed. Also, if he hates seeing his face so much, why does he have two statues of himself in the room where he's waiting to ambush you? I guess that this is what happens when a retard gets psychic powers. His boss fight can be really engaging until you realize that you can just lay down on the ground to dodge every single one of his moves, except the chair throw. There's no point in giving him all these different moves if you're just gonna let the player deal with all of them in the exact same incredibly easy way. Fighting him without laying down is really fun because every single one of his moves requires different positioning and movement from you, as well as the ability to read his patterns. It's good that you at least have enough motive not to always lay down, because you can finish the fight much faster if you're taking shots at him in between changing your position. This is another situation in which the designers have given the player an option that will make the game easier for them, but also potentially hurt their experience. After you take off about half of Mantis' HP bar, he'll try using Meryl against you again, and when that fails, the fucking genius just tries it again, and even acts like he's got you in checkmate this time, but you just beat the fuck out of her again. For his final phase, he starts using multiple of his moves at once, which can still be dealt with by crawling on the ground, but this is really fun to go against if you don't. My only other issue with this fight is that the checkpoint for it is set way back in the corridor, which means that you have to watch Meryl get possessed every time you die. You always have to knock her down in the beginning of the fight as well, but at least that means that every time you die you get to take out your frustrations on her, which is great. The fight isn't very different on Extreme, which is a little disappointing. The fight could have been very fun if Mantis was more aggressive, or if his final phase where he attacks you with everything that he's got at once actually started from the beginning of the fight. It would have been nuts, and while we're talking about nuts, it turns out that Mantis' face looks like a dried up ball sack.
The first person whose mind I dove into was my father's. I saw nothing but disgust and hatred for me in his heart. My mother died in childbirth, and he despised me for it. I thought my father was going to kill me. That's when my future disappeared. I lost my past as well. When I came to, the village was engulfed in flames.
Psycho Mantis' struggle was born out of the bad luck that caused his mother to die in childbirth and left him with a father that hates him for it, along with a psychic ability that can be used to do evil just as easily as it can be used to do good. He failed to rise above his circumstances and use his power for destruction, only to tragically realize at the very end that he could have used them for good all along. In almost every part of the story you can see a cycle that's being perpetuated, with the one here being a cycle of hatred that started from Mantis' father and kept going with Mantis, because his father's hate made him hate the world. I love how these final moment conversations with the bosses are always played completely straight. It might be a bit ridiculous sometimes, but it serves to flesh these characters out, and is good especially because all of their stories link back to the game's central themes and expand on them, by showing how perpetuating destructive cycles and failing to deal with the predetermined aspects of life looks like.
This is the first time I've ever used my power to help someone. It's strange. It feels kind of nice.
Time to play around with some dogs now. Going through this area for the first time might be a bit annoying, but you just have to learn that you should equip the night goggles and punch every dog as soon as you see it. You can even practice that at your local dog park if you want to be prepared. Meryl is gonna be waiting for you at the end of the section, and if you punch her here, she'll sick the wolves on you. If you punch her, then immediately hide under a box, one of the dogs will come and piss on you. If you then equip the now pissed on box in this area, the wolves won't attack you anymore, because the piss on it smells real nice to them. Next up is the small minefield. Meryl walks through it and leaves a set of footprints which you can follow to get across safely. It's real nice of her to do after all the beatings she took. If you take too much time, the footsteps will just fade away, but don't worry, Snake remembers where the shit was. Snake. Snake. Snake, just look at the walkthrough. How does he still have legs? If you walk on one of the mines, Meryl will have a little animation where she sighs in disappointment, which is a nice touch. If you die in this area or leave and come back, Meryl will start warning you if you're about to step on a claymore, and you'll be forced to stand still while she's doing it. I guess that this is all pretty cool, but you don't even need to engage with any of it. You can just scroll through or even just walk forward from your starting position and get to the other side without a problem. Once you do it, Meryl will get sniped and you have to backtrack for the PSG-1. Having to backtrack for it can be frustrating, but on the other hand it can also add to the experience, because this is not just a backtracking section. Meryl getting shot right in front of you and you being unable to help her in any other way than leaving her as she's bleeding out on the ground and coming back later can be a memorable moment because of the feelings of powerlessness and tension that it can evoke. Looking at this situation from Sniper Wolf's point of view reveals another way that this section adds to the experience. She could have just waited a bit and used her element of surprise to shoot Snake instead of Meryl, but because she didn't do that, we can assume that she wanted to have a fair one-on-one battle with Snake. This ties into her desire for someone to kill her and set her free from the battlefield. It makes sense for her as a character to do it this way.
Okay. Thanks.
What's wrong, Naomi?
Nothing. I'm just surprised you're willing to sacrifice yourself. You got the genes of a soldier, not a savior.
Naomi is like, why do you wanna save Meryl so much? He wants to fuck her. His genes don't matter. On a real note, I've seen people say that Naomi was jealous of Meryl, but all the scenes that seemingly suggest that are more about Naomi trying to see if Snake has emotions, and isn't just a bloodthirsty clone of Big Boss. From her point of view, all she really knows about Snake is that he was created to be that, and that's why she's so surprised to find out that he wants to save somebody. It's here that she starts realizing that her view on genetics is wrong and that her desire to take revenge on Snake is misguided. Now, let's go get the PSG. There's a lot of piss in this game. You have Otacon pissing himself, dogs pissing on your box, and now this guy in the toilet, who's pissing up a fucking storm. I love how you can hear his stream of piss slowly becoming fitful as he's getting closer to being done. You can even see him shaking his cock a little to get the last drops out. By the way, the genome soldiers' dicks are so small that you can't even see them, which might mean that Big Boss had the small size gene and that all of his clones got it too. Maybe that's why Liquid was so mad. On your way back to the armory, you might be surprised to find that the snowfield is now filled with claymores on this side too. The game even shows enough restraint to not tell you about it somehow, which is great. There's also these two long-range sentries now, but you know how to deal with those. Other than that, nothing new or interesting happens while you're backtracking, and while as I said, this section has its merits, it doesn't mean that they couldn't have made it better by adding some new shit for you to deal with in these areas. The only other thing I have to add here is that you can use the PSG-1 to snipe the guards inside the no weapons allowed room from outside of it. I'm pretty sure that they just forgot that you have the means to do this once you get the PSG, but that's not really a big issue. What is actually a big issue is that once you walk into Sniper Wolf's fight, you won't be able to go back. So if you walk in there with no diazepam, which helps keep your aim steady, then you can have fun dealing with Snake's Parkinson's, cause the game won't allow you to go back for that shit. The fight is still doable without it, but I can guarantee you that it won't be a very enjoyable experience. Putting that aside, the sniper battle is pretty straightforward, with the main challenges being having good aim, being quick on your feet, and quick at locating Sniper Wolf. Something that can help you with that last one is being on the lookout for her cold breath, because it will tell you exactly where she's hiding. It's an entirely fair and skill-based fight with no trivializing solution, which is pretty much perfect. I only wish that they did something more interesting with her on extreme, as all that really seems to change there is her level of aggression, which doesn't make too much of a difference when you've already gotten used to her patterns. Snake looks like he's eating something after he defeats a boss and increases his HP, but one of the animators for the game clarified that apparently this animation was supposed to portray him getting hyped up by pumping his fist. After the fight, you make your way to this door and these guys pop out of thin air and hold you up. Then Sniper Wolf, who you just shot like 10 times, comes over and flirts with you until this goon knocks you out. You suddenly wake up in the back of a yeah, I'm not doing this shit. You wake up looking at some lights and listening to these freaks talk about some bullshit. Now it's time for the torture sequence. On normal difficulty you have to mash through 4 rounds of this shit, and on extreme you have to mash through 6. Meaning that you have to mash through a total of 8 rounds on normal and 12 rounds on extreme, since you can only escape after you go through the second torture sequence. Depending on how good you are at mashing, this section might either be a breeze or a fucking nightmare. The good thing about it is that if you can't mash well, you won't be barred from playing the rest of the game. You just have to submit and go for the Otacon ending. The most interesting aspect of this section is that you won't be able to save your game until you get through the first 4 rounds of torture, and you also won't be able to press continue after you die like you usually can. You have to load a save if you fuck up. This won't be a big deal if you saved a bit before or after the Sniper Wolf fight, but if your last save was somewhere before that, there's a real risk here of having to repeat content, and maybe having to fight bosses that gave you a lot of trouble for a second time. Basically, if you last saved a long time ago, this puts you into a situation where you know that submitting will guarantee that you don't have to repeat content, but it will also lead to Meryl's death, while attempting to survive the torture will save Meryl but also potentially send you back to your last save. A devious little detail here is that if Snake's HP bar gets fully depleted, you'll still be able to mash and gain some HP back because he won't die until the timer runs out. So if it's your first time playing the game and your strategy is to try your best to survive but submit at the last second if you see that you're about to fail, you. This might trick you into thinking that you still got a chance, but you don't. Usually I'm not a big fan of using the tedium of repeating content as a punishment, but I like it here because it creates a perfect risk-reward scenario that adds complexity to this section of the game. After you get through the first torture sequence, you'll be stuck in this cell until OCELOT brings you back for round 2. In the meantime, you get a call from Colonel Campbell. Some of the coda calls in this game are skippable and some aren't, so it's kinda gay that you have to click through these conversations to skip them. You can't just hang up. After the second torture sequence, you get another coda call in which Snake begs Naomi for some woman yapping ASMR.
Was Big Boss really your father?
That's what he said. That's all I know.
And you were able to kill him? Knowing that?
Yup.
How?
He wanted it. Besides, some people just need killing.
That's patricide.
Yup.
The way he just keeps replying with yup is fucking killing me. In this conversation, Naomi further understands that her assumptions about Snake were completely wrong. He didn't kill Grey Fox, her brother, because he's some inhuman killing machine that enjoys only wasting its enemies. He did it because he had to, and he wasn't very happy about that. Evidenced by the fact that he still considers Grey Fox to have been a friend. After this, the guard barely avoids shitting himself by running into the bathroom, which gives Otagel a chance to come over and talk to you. He gives you some ketchup, a ration, a handkerchief, and a level 6 keycard. All of this shit instead of just giving you a fucking gun. As far as I know, there are 3 ways to escape the cell after this. The first one is to hide under the bed while the guard is not looking, which makes him come inside and search for you, allowing you to surprise him and escape. The second way is to lay down on the ground and use the ketchup to play dead. The third way is to survive the rest of the torture sequences until Grey Fox comes up to the cell door and destroys it. You have to deal with the guard while unarmed, since you don't have any weapons, but the easiest way to do it is to just run away from him. Once you reach the next room, he'll get the shits again and run to the bathroom. You can even knock on his door after to fuck with him. If you submit to OCELOT's torture, it's possible for Snake to catch this guy's cold and start sneezing. Sneezing next to a guard will cause him to come over and investigate, which is really fun. You can take some cold medicine to stop sneezing, which is something that I wish I could do. Fucking summer allergies. Fuck this shit. At some point after you pick up your items, you may notice that there's a bomb in them. Once you see it, you can just throw it out, but if you don't, the explosion will fuck you up when the timer runs out. This is a pretty fun thing to do to the player. The issue is that they kind of pussied out when it comes to letting the bomb actually explode and kill the players that didn't notice it by themselves. If the timer on the bomb starts getting pretty close to 0, Deep Throat will call you and straight up tell you that it's in your inventory and that you need to throw it out. If you ignore that and let the timer get even closer to 0, the Colonel will call you and tell you how to throw it away step by step. So basically they made sure that even the people who were dropped in their head as a child and have autism and Down syndrome will be able to deal with this problem. Doing it this way essentially makes the whole thing a bit fake. When you notice the bomb by yourself, it feels like your ability to be observant and notice things that weren't there before saved you from certain deaths, but it actually didn't, since the game would have saved you from it anyway. If you notice it and throw it out without knowing that the game will basically do it for you if you don't, then you still feel that you did it by yourself, so this will make a difference. Some players are a bit more experimental than others though, and so some of them might let the timer get closer to 0 on purpose and see how managing to fight the bomb by yourself is made meaningless by these coda calls. The solution here is to just let the player die if they fucking miss it. I swear it feels like the game is helicopter parenting you here. Enough about this bomb shit though, time to go play with the wolves again. If you equip the handkerchief that Otacon gave you, the wolves won't attack you because it smells like Sniper Wolf, which is a cool detail that will also improve your experience a bit by making your 4th visit to this place much less annoying. After the cave, we make it back here again and watch a flashback of something that happened like an hour ago at most. We get our first sniff of Naomi's bullshit here and it makes me wonder, why did Naomi even mention her made-up grandfather? What was the point of this lie? It makes no sense and that might not seem like a big deal, but you have to remember that it's only because of this lie that she gets found out. So having it make sense would certainly be better for the players who like consistency in their stories. When this go is over, we make our way to the first tower section. I've seen people complain about this one, but as far as towers go, I've certainly seen worse. The best strategy here is to throw stun grenades and time it so that each one explodes right as the guard starts recovering recovering from the last one. The only other thing that I found to be helpful is to set down a claymore right in front of the door that the first few enemies come through, which saves you from having to waste more stun grenades. Setting a few claymores, shooting with the FAMAS and using the throws chain knockdown mechanic can work too, but as long as you have stun grenades, using them will always be the best strategy for this section, since they undoubtedly lower your chances of taking damage the most. The good thing about using them here is that when it comes to gameplay, you still have to time them pretty well in order to not give the guards enough time to stand up and shoot, so they don't completely trivialize this section, because they require a small amount of skill to use well. What you just saw here was me accidentally bumping into a wall and Snake understanding that as if I was trying to hug the wall instead, but that was not my intention. The fault for bumping into it is obviously mine, but there is something to say here about hugging walls as a context sensitive action. In this case, it worsened the severity of the mistake I made by slowing me down enough for the guards to get close and start shooting. This wouldn't be a problem if it was me that decided to stick to the wall, as the responsibility for the consequences of that action would be mine, but it was the game itself that made that happen, because Snake automatically hugs a wall if you walk into it while holding the corresponding directional button. On one hand, this makes wall hugging feel incredibly smooth, and especially when compared to how it feels when it's done via a dedicated button. The best way I can describe it is that it feels like your character gets literally glued to the wall, which feels very unnatural. My theory about this is that since sticking your back to a wall in real life requires you to hold that position using a small amount of directional force, instead of feeling like an effortless and automatic stick, it feels more natural to hold a directional button in order to do it in a game. But on the other hand, it causes accidents like this one to happen and also makes getting close to a wall without sticking to it very awkward. And that's something that I found myself doing a lot during the next boss fight, which I'll talk about in a second. Ultimately, the automatic wall hug has its pros and cons, which can be weighed differently by different players. My solution here would be to give the player the option to switch between being able to use a button to do it and being able to do it automatically. Everybody would be happy this way. Personally, I like the automatic one more because it feels smoother, but I wouldn't mind having the option to gain more precise control over my character, and I might have even ended up using it when I got annoyed by the automatic wall hugging during the high-D fight, which we're just about to get to. But first we have to rappel down the tower while Liquid is shooting at us. I always make Snake look like a bumbling retard when I go through this section, because I'm always trying to go through it as fast as possible. I'm sure that if you go slowly and get used to how he controls here, you can make it down a lot more gracefully, but since it's pretty hard to die here, even if you fuck up a lot, I never saw a reason not to do it my way. That is, until I played the game on extreme and I was left with a leak of HP and no rations after doing this shit. This is partly why I love extreme and higher difficulty options in video games as a whole. They make you focus and pay attention in sections that you would have otherwise forced your way through, because you usually have enough resources to be careless without suffering any significant repercussions for it. I took it like a man though, and kept it going with no rations and no HP. Turns out that doing this shit here is not a great idea, because the high-D is pretty annoying to beat without taking any damage. First we have to go through this really fun section though. Woo, let's go! Yeah, I already said everything I need to say about this shit.
So, the snake's finally come out of his home. Are you ready now, my brother?
Why are you calling me brother? Who the hell are you?
I'm you. I'm your shadow.
But Liquid, you're not black, and you're not Michael Jackson either. You're blonde and white as fuck. You look nothing like my shadow. The high-D fight is pretty simple in the beginning. You shoot a missile at Liquid and then he fires back with his machine gun while moving around. You need to keep track of which side of the tower he's on so you have enough time to aim and shoot at him before he starts firing the machine gun by himself. This boss fight is another example of the Soliton radar's trivializing usefulness. On hard and extreme, you need to use your eyes and your ears to figure out where Liquid is and move accordingly. While on normal and below, you just need to take a look at the radar, which shows Liquid as a purple dot even when he's outside of its range. In his next phase, he'll sometimes lower the high-D below the top of the tower and start circling it, which makes him harder to keep track of on extreme, but does basically nothing when you have the radar and can always see exactly where he is. He also starts being much more aggressive in this phase, ditching the somewhat turn-based approach he had in the last one and becoming a lot more unpredictable. But if you keep track of his moves movements you can deal with that pretty easily. You can do that on extreme by using the Stinger's lock-on mechanic as a wall hack. Another interesting thing about the Stinger's lock-on mechanic in this fight is that you can use it to curve missiles by locking onto the hind D and quickly moving your reticle in any other direction before shooting. The only difference on extreme is that the Stinger can only lock onto the middle part of the hind D. I gotta say that this is one of the fights which I enjoyed much more on extreme, and it's mainly because of the lack of a radar. Not being able to know exactly where he is just by looking at the top right of the screen for a second made me much more engaged in the fight, as I had to not only be constantly on the lookout but also really open my ears. As while the wall hack trick is useful, you still have to spend some time to look for the hind D through the walls, and being able to use the sound of its blades to at least know in which direction you should be looking helps a lot. You also can't constantly be using the Stinger since you can't move while using it, and the hind D, in its second phase especially, won't always let you stay still. On normal difficulty, the fight loses a whole layer of complexity because of the Soliton radar, which isn't great. I really think that it might have been designed without the Soliton radar in mind, because putting effort into making sure that the player can accurately locate the hind D just by its sound doesn't make sense when you know that most players would never need to do that shit. They really should have just jammed the radar for this fight on normal difficulty. I think that most players will enjoy how engaging it is to use two of your most important senses to keep track of the hind D instead of just looking at the radar. On a side note, you may have noticed that I haven't made any concrete judgments about the quality of any of the boss fights in the game as a whole, and that's because MGS1 is a really unique case. It's hard to compare its boss fights to those of any other game or even to each other, because when it comes to making these bosses, it seems like the designers mainly focused on gameplay variety. They all test out different subsets of your gamer skills, and while it's undeniable that they all have some common ground in terms of testing things like reaction time or mastery over the game's controls, the differences between them are significant enough to outweigh their commonalities, which makes each one of them feel extremely distinct in terms of gameplay. It's almost like you're playing a different minigame whenever you encounter any one of them, and that's one of their best qualities. They're certainly not the most engaging or complex, but they're undoubtedly one of the most varied, which is perfect for a game like MGS, which I think above all else in terms of gameplay strives to provide a memorably varied experience. It doesn't always succeed, and sometimes lessens its potential to be memorable because of its lack of trust in the player and its tendency to trivialize its own challenges, but as a whole it manages to pull it off more than it doesn't, which is why the game is still remembered as a classic to this day. Now let's have the classic experience of going down the second tower, which is twice as much fun as climbing it was. Let's go! By the way, if you call the colonel while smoking a cigarette, Naomi will start explaining how smoking them leads to lung cancer, and then Snake will completely blow her the fuck out.
You know a lot about science, but you don't know how good a cigarette tastes in the morning.
Get fucked, bitch. We now go into the elevator that Otagel fixed, and it turns out that there were 4 other guys in there with us. Since the elevator is so small and their appearance here is so surprising, the fight can feel very intense, even though it's not that dangerous if you have some rations on you. I had to do this fight with no rations and barely any HP on extreme as well. Thankfully these guys didn't do enough damage to take me down in one hit, which probably saved me from having to go down this fucking tower a couple of more times after dying here, but it still wasn't very easy to pull this off. After going through the hind D fight and the elevator fight with a sliver of HP left and having to deal with this retarded checkpoint, Snake's sigh of relief here matched the one I did, which was a fun coincidence. It's a really small thing, but humanizing the main character using things like sighs of relief or small signs of emotion makes it surprisingly easier to place yourself in their shoes. Snake calling Otagel in the middle of a snowfield with no cover after getting shot by a sniper is proof that Snake also got Big Boss's autism genes. I guess the sniper wolf doesn't shoot him here because she wants to taunt him first, but Snake, who is an experienced soldier, would never do this shit.
I told you, I'd never quit the hunt. Now you're mine.
Hey bitch, check out what I have.
Check it out, I'm in the house like carpet. And if there's too many heads in my blunt, I won't spark it out, put it in my pocket and save it like rocket fuel. Till everybody's gone and it's cool, then I spark it up with my brother. His mama named him Moan, but I call him Moan Lover, and he's more than a cover, he's a quill. We'll Putting shit together like the house that John built on a hill. Cause this you're gonna feel like velvet, turtle. My style fits tighter than a girdle. If you hate it, then you can just leave it like Beaver. But in a day or two, I'll make you a true believer in me. Cause like the alphabet, you'll see that ism kicks a rhyme, not your everyday soliloquy. Like Chef Boyardee, my rhyme is truly cooking. Peace to Matty Rich, cause he's straight out of Brooklyn, New York. I don't eat pork or swine when I dine. I drink a cup of Kool-Aid, not a big glass of wine or a Incine. If you have time, I'll drop rhyme again.
Other than the fact that you can do this shit, this fight isn't much different from the first one. You weren't able to use the Nikita in that one, which makes me think that you're intentionally allowed to do it here. Since the fight is just a 1v1 sniper battle again, it's good that there is an alternate way to go through it, but it really is way too easy. It would have been better if you could only hit her with the missile while she was looking down her scope and not paying attention to her surroundings. Maybe if she started moving before you managed to reach her, she would move away and snipe the rocket down. Pretty much anything that would complicate using the Nikita in this fight would be very welcome. I'd say that this is the worst fight in the game simply because it's a retread of something that we already did, and the new way to go through it is way too easy. If we say that hypothetically the developers didn't have a chance to improve this fight, then it's actually good that you can use the Nikita, since some players would certainly and rightfully be annoyed if they had to snipe her again and essentially repeat a boss fight.
I watched the brutality, the stupidity of mankind through the scope of my rifle. I joined this group of revolutionaries to take my revenge on the world.
Sniper Wolf was born on the battlefield and lost her whole family and all her friends on it. She lived a miserable life and prayed to make it through each day, until one day Big Boss came along and took her under his shell. From that point on, she became a sniper and started taking her revenge on the world, which took everything away from her. The brutality of war made her hate the world, which in turn caused her to perpetuate it. At the end of her life, she realizes that that was a mistake, and that during the whole time that she spent killing people, she actually wanted to get killed herself. Since she didn't really want to keep perpetuating the cycle of violence and brutality, she wanted it to end, at least for her. Otagel then comes along and fucking falls to his knees. The whole Otagel loving Sniper Wolf thing has always seemed like it was added in the story just so Otagel can ask Snake if love can bloom even on the battlefield, and then Snake can answer with some shit that sounds really cool. I mean, we find out that Otagel quote unquote loves her about an hour before we kill her. It's really half-baked, but it is at least somewhat relevant to Otagel's story. Now, it's finally time to get to disc 2. When I was playing the game for the first time, this shit kinda startled me, cause I thought I got a bullshit game over. If this happened to me when I was older, I would for sure beat my kids because of it. Once you put the second disc in, you get to a lava level, which is pretty much mandatory to have at the time. One interesting thing you can do here is use the Nikita or the Stinger to destroy this crane and avoid having to crouch under it. If you shoot at it once, it will stop moving, and if you shoot at it twice, it will fall down in the lava. That's the most interesting thing here. After this, we get attacked on the Akira lift. Why did he just scream like that? Nothing much to say about this encounter or anything else that happens until Miller calls us. He tells us that Naomi's grandfather couldn't have been in the FBI because the FBI director at the time, Edgar Hoover, was really racist. But what he doesn't tell you is that he was really racist and gay.
According to Susan Rosensteel, two young men arrived and first Hoover, then Cohn and Rosensteel went into the bedroom and had sex with them.
Oh, and also, Naomi's grandfather couldn't have been undercover in 1950s New York because the mafia sting operations didn't start until the 1960s and took place in Chicago. Stupid bitch. Now it's time for a rematch with Volk and Raven. The best thing about this fight is that you can use almost everything in your arsenal against Raven, which means you can approach the fight however you want. I always end up using the Stinger though, cause it makes the fight more dynamic. Mechanically, he's pretty simple. He can only walk around and shoot you when he sees you, but as you work his HP down, he'll start moving faster and faster until he's walking around at supersonic speeds. They should have called him Vulcan Hedgehog, or just Black Sonic. For any Sonic fans watching this video, who's the talking black guy in the Sonic gang? Is it Knuckles? No, he's Arabic. Is it Shadow? Unlikely, cause he's a bit racist, so maybe it's Sonic himself. I mean, he was voiced by a black guy first, but he doesn't even speak in Ebonics. Fuck this shit. Anyway, Raven is fucking insane on Extreme. He's in Sonic mode from the beginning of the fight, which makes it quite intense for its whole duration. Everything else still works the same though, so to make up for his speed boost, you just have to do everything faster as well. It's really good to have an endgame boss fight that allows you to use almost every weapon you have and everything you've learned. It's especially good good in this game, because every other boss fight after this one is fought in a specific way, and every boss fight before it was the same too. So having one where you can just do whatever you want while you have the game's full arsenal on you is exactly what the game needed. After you kill him, he reveals that the DARPA chief was actually Decoy Octopus. This twist is pretty fucking good. It's got some decent foreshadowing, and the game gives you a lot of clues about it, so you can figure it out on your own before it gets revealed, which is always great. The only issue with it is that if you think about it, you can completely figure it out after you see this scene in the early game.
You fool! You've killed him! I'm sorry, sir.
His mental shielding was very strong. I could not dive into his mind.
Now we'll never get that detonation code.
You can clearly see that it's the DARPA chief who's laid out on the table, and even if you're still a bit unsure after you see this, Baker will essentially confirm it by saying that the DARPA chief should have had psychic insulation, which should have prevented Psycho Mantis from reading his mind. If you link this to Mantis literally saying that he couldn't read his mind, which he does like 20 minutes before this, you have the twist completely figured out. If they wanted you to be able to do that this early, they should have at least made it a bit harder, because making an easy deduction is much less fun than being surprised by a twist that affects the story this much. Now, since it's a Metal Gear game and we're nearing the end of it, we're gonna have fucking twists coming out of our ears. It turns out that Naomi was using the identification papers of the real Naomi Hunter, who disappeared somewhere in the Middle East. So she somehow became chief of Foxhound's medical staff without anybody finding out about her having a fake ID. Okay, after that we finally get to see Metal Gear Rex, but the moment is kind of ruined by this little cutscene. The way the camera is framed while we're walking up to Metal Gear is perfect for a reveal. You don't need a fade to black and a cutscene here, it's pointless. They just can't let you be amazed by yourself. They have to force it on you through this cutscene, cause they don't trust you to look where they want you to look. Why do you have so much trust issues, buddy? What happened? Now, we're in for one of the most codec-ridden sections in the game. You walk to the first ladder and Otacon calls you to tell you that he's trying to figure out how the PAL keys work, which is okay. But then you get another one of these after about 20 seconds.
I just got past his 3rd security level. He was a pretty careful guy.
Do you think you'll break in soon?
I never met a system I couldn't bust into.
Okay, keep trying.
What was the fucking point of that? It doesn't give us any new information, and interrupting gameplay just so Otacon can flex his super hacker skills is not worth it. A minute after that we get another codec call. This one at least has very important information, but with it being the 3rd codec call in the span of 2 minutes, this section is starting to feel really annoying gameplay wise. You can't move around for a minute without getting fucking interrupted, and about 40 seconds after the last call we get another one. This one is important as well, but damn, let me play the fucking game. They could have just had all this shit in one codec call. It's not like the game hasn't done that before. We now get to watch a cutscene as well.
Big Boss's DNA and $1 billion.
I love how Snake can't stop himself from repeating somebody's words even when he's supposed to be staying hidden. And now the PAL key just magically flies away from his hand as well. I know that he's supposed to be dropping it because he got startled or some shit, but its trajectory looks so unnatural. It just looks like the key decided to fuck off. Now you need to find it using the mine detector, which is mindlessly easy and was probably done so Liquid and OCELOT could have time to leave that room, so you can go inside it when you get the key back. You can't use the mine detector on extreme though, since you don't have the radar, which means that you just have to walk around until you find it. It's pretty bad that there isn't an alternative way to find it faster, because nobody will have fun looking for this shit. By the way, if you have less than 10 alerts when you get to this point in the game, the PAL key will be eaten by a rat. You have to wait for it to come out of one of these holes and shoot it to get it back. Now we have to go input the key and then change its shape and input it twice more. Gameplay wise, this section of the game is probably the worst one. There's nothing for you to do while you wait for the PAL to change shape, and gameplay wise there's nothing interesting on the walk over to the freezer and lava place either. So here's a fun fact while we wait. If you stay in a really cold place for too long, your rations will freeze and you won't be able to eat them until you warm them up. You can do that by equipping them and waiting for a bit, which will apparently defrost them using your body heat. An insane detail here is that you can use the hand dryer in the bathroom to defrost them a bit faster. Those things always smell like piss for some reason. The only other interesting thing that happens in this section is that we find out about Foxdie and then have this conversation with Naomi.
Rhodesia, what's now known as Zimbabwe?
Yes. Rhodesia was owned by England until 1965, and there were lots of Indian laborers around. That's probably where I got my skin color from, but I'm not even sure about that.
What skin color? She looks as white as a cum shot. Naomi's real backstory is that she has no backstory. She doesn't have a family, and the only people that she had in her past were destroyed by Snake, which is why she dedicated her life to getting revenge on him, but at this point she fully realizes that he isn't the monster that she thought he is. She tells us that the decision to inject him with Fox dye wasn't entirely hers, it was actually a part of the operation.
Know that? No, that's not the whole truth. The real thing I wanted to tell you was... Snake,
Hey, what are you doing?
Snake!
Naomi!
I'm pretty sure that she wanted to tell Snake that she's sorry for either thinking of him as a monster or for making a change to his Fox dye, which we'll talk about later. Those things make the most sense. The only other option I see here is a love confession, but that's obviously not the case. Once we input the final pokey, Liquid reveals that he was acting like Miller all along, and that the pokeys we inputted actually activated the warhead instead of deactivating it. One thing that irks me about this reveal is that it seems unlikely that Otagel wouldn't check if the warhead was actually activated before telling Snake to use the pokeys. I guess you could say that he couldn't get access to that information, but seeing as how he didn't even mention that he took a crack at it, I'm willing to call this a plot contrivance, which isn't good. The whole pokey, twist and ending sequence hinge on this shit, and it could easily be fixed by having Otagel say that he couldn't hack into the system. After this, we start getting gassed. The short little sequence is a little stupid. You just call Otagel and wait for him to open the door, which he does after about 15 seconds. You could have had some guards rush in here and have you kill all of them before your oxygen runs out, instead of just having you do nothing until the door unlocks. Once you escape out of Auschwitz, you'll be able to watch Liquid while he's waiting for you to step up. I recently found out that he has a unique idol animation in which he hypes himself up, which is cool. Once you get near him, he starts explaining more about his grand plan. He also says that Naomi made a change to Fox dye right before the operation. This whole Fox dye plot point gets extremely fucking messy if you factor in the information we have from NGS 2 and 4. I'll say more about that later though, cause now we need to fight Metal Gear.
I'm proud of the destiny that is encoded into my fairy genes. Yeah.
Why was that so cute?
Yeah.
The Rex fight might seem a bit hard, but that's only until you do enough experimenting to find out what works and what doesn't. Because every one of his moves has a way to be dodged consistently. For his laser attack you move backwards, for the machine gun you move sideways, and for the missiles you just move closer to him. The good thing about it is that even after you figure these things out, the fight doesn't become too easy, since you still have to time your attacks in between dodging Rex's attacks, and the time frame in which you can do that isn't too big, so you have to stay on your toes and do everything quickly without missing a beat. There's another strategy that has you throwing chaff grenades, but I don't have any footage of that since I'm not a pussy. Once you deplete his HP bar for the first time, Greatfox will join the battle and chill with you for a bit on the side. He says that he's the one that killed Naomi's parents and that Snake should be the one to tell her that. After that he goes and gets owned by Liquid, but doesn't die before giving us a little monologue from under Rex's shoe.
We're not tools of the government or anyone else. Fighting was the only thing I was good at.
Greatfox ultimately managed to take control over himself and fought for what he believed in until the end. Just like Sniper Wolf, he was still perpetuating a cycle of violence and is now glad that it has finally come to an end. Now we get to fight Rex again, but this time he's much faster, which means that you have to be faster as well. Since in this phase, Liquid has opened up the Metal Gear's head and has shown himself, you can use stun grenades to blind him and even shoot him with the PSG, which means that they went out of their way to make Liquid an object that's separate from Metal Gear, and that's really fucking cool. Other than that, this phase is pretty much the same as the last one. The fight as a whole isn't very different on Extreme. I personally didn't notice even a single difference, which is a shame. Making this fight even more mechanically demanding would have made it a lot more fun for Extreme players, who most likely already know exactly what to do in the fight when it comes to strategy. Once you finish it up, Rex's explosion sends Snake into a wall, which knocks him out. Liquid then comes up to him and somehow drags him to the top of Rex.
Looks like your revolution was a failure.
Just because you've destroyed Metal Gear doesn't mean I am done fighting.
Fighting? What are you really after?
A world where warriors like us are honored as we once were.
I love how Liquid's whole plan completely falls apart, and yet his morale doesn't seem to be affected in the slightest. He's still going on about his ideology like he isn't about to be bombed sky high in a few minutes.
Warriors such as us? I don't want that kind of world.
Ha! You lie. So why are you here then? Why do you continue to follow your orders while your superiors betray you? Why did you come here? Well, I'll tell you then. You enjoy all the killing. That's why.
What?
Are you denying it? Haven't you already killed most of my comrades?
That was...
I watched your face when you did it. It was filled with the joy of battle.
You're wrong.
There's a killer inside you. You don't have to deny it. We were created to be that way.
One of the most interesting things in the story is the frequent mention of how Snake might actually be enjoying himself on the battlefield and on this mission. Snake himself says that the only time he feels alive is when he's on the battlefield. He fights for himself and does it with no purpose in life and no ultimate goal. Mantis says that he himself joined Liquid just because he wanted an excuse to kill as many people as he could. And Tank claims that Snake is even worse than him right after saying that. Meryl and Liquid even go as far as to suggest that Snake loves war and enjoys killing. Meryl even indirectly compares him to Big Boss, and he doesn't say that she's wrong. And when you think about who Snake is and his place in the world at this point, this makes perfect sense. He was genetically engineered to be the perfect soldier, and war is probably all he ever knew, meaning that it was the only thing that he could possibly derive enjoyment from. He was basically created as a perfect pawn that will never refuse a mission and always complete it successfully, because it gives him an opportunity to do what he does best and what makes him feel most alive. Even the Colonel uses this to his advantage to make him accept the mission. Snake himself is seen struggling with whether or not he should accept that as a part of who he is or fight back against it. When talking with Meryl, he seems to have accepted that he fights and kills for no other reason than the fact that being on the battlefield makes him feel alive. This changes when Liquid confronts him about it directly at the end of the game. Liquid doesn't believe that Snake is actually opposed to the idea of living in a world that's constantly at war, because after all, if war is the only thing that makes Snake feel alive and killing brings him joy, then a world stuck in a never-ending war is what Snake would presumably want. In this confrontation, we see that Liquid is almost the same as Snake, except that he's fully bought into the idea that he can't fight his genes, so he'll therefore follow their quote-unquote orders, which are apparently telling him that he should keep killing people in war, because that's what he was genetically engineered to do best. I guess he skipped a few pages from the selfish gene, because the book makes it clear that that's not how the shit works. People unjustly criticize the story for this, missing out on the fact that Liquid's misunderstanding of genes, while obviously a little stupid, is completely deliberate. The story, through its characters, presents a few different ways in which one can deal or fail to deal with the seemingly predetermined aspects of life. All these characters struggle with that in one way or another, and we already saw that some of them couldn't deal with it until the end. They couldn't move away from everything that happened, and got stuck in a cycle of hatred and violence, and only death could save them from it, because they couldn't let go of their hate until they saw how pointless it ultimately was. Now let's keep going and see where Liquid, Naomi, Otacon and Snake end up. Turns out that the Secretary of Defense was behind the whole Foxdie thing, and that he now wants to nuke Shadow Moses to destroy all evidence of Metal Gear and Les Infanterie. After that, Liquid decides that a good use of his very limited time would be a fist fight with Snake, who you might notice doesn't have a shirt on now. You might wonder, did Liquid undress him? Maybe he wanted to see if Snake got the small cock gene too. Before the fight begins, Liquid starts a timer that's tied to a bomb that's set to detonate the moment Meryl dies. Oh yeah, Meryl is here too. Where the fuck did he pull her out from, and how did he carry her on top of Rex as well? This doesn't make any fucking sense, but the trade-off is that fighting Liquid on top of Rex is really cool. Maybe they could have made it so Liquid had Meryl with him and Rex, and had Snake climb on top of Metal Gear so he can go in and save her, only to get knocked out by Liquid, who had already exited through Metal Gear's mouth or whatever that shit is. Something like this would have made the idea of this whole thing happening on top of Rex a bit more believable without sacrificing anything. Anyway, we start the fight by... Wait, what the fuck is that? I don't have any hacks on, I swear. Turns out that if you have a controller in port 2 and you press the attack button on it during this fight, this debug menu will pop up. I don't know what any of this shit means though. Getting back on topic, the Liquid fight is pretty fucking good. All of his moves are telegraphed very well, so the fight is completely fair and skill based. The only thing that you have to learn through trial and error is that he'll duck to the side sometimes and counter attack while you're left hitting the air with a full combo. Once you know that he can do this, you'll be able to recognize the stance he uses when he's trying to bait you into attacking and missing, so it's gonna be a fully fair fight from then on. Movement and telegraph reading are the two skills that you'll be relying on during this fight, and Liquid does a good job at testing them for you. He's apparently so good at it that people are still crying about it to this day. I agree that the fight isn't intuitive enough to be beatable on your first and maybe even second attempt, but if you pay attention to his animations and behavior during those first few attempts, you'll certainly be able to beat him soon after. After the fight, Meryl wakes up and says something slightly concerning.
I didn't give in to the torture.
Torture?
and things even worse than that.
I'm pretty sure that the implication here is that she got sexually assaulted. Metal Gear deals with some serious topics, but this feels a little out of left field for me. Here's what MGS1's English translator Jeremy Blaustein said about this.
And people are like, she must have been raped. OCELOT must have raped her or something. And was this ever implied at all in the game, or is this intentional, or?
No, I don't remember any. No.
You just think it was
what in Metal Gear Solid 1?
Yeah, Meryl.
Yeah, she said something about going through torture and things even worse than that.
Oh yeah. Actually, you did kind of just ring a bell right now. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, right. I might have just stuck that in though. I mean, I don't remember it as being a major theme. Sometimes I had to just cover lip flap.
Yeah.
Oh, so he basically just threw this into the script without thinking about it too much. Despite what he's saying here, it's still possible that the original Japanese script implied it as well, but there's no way for me to know that as of right now. Even weirder is that before she implies this, she says that it wasn't that bad, which I don't think she would say if she was sexually assaulted, but after that she says this.
During all the pain and shame, there was one thing I was sure of. A single hope that I held on to.
Shame implies sexual assault again, so at this point I just don't fucking know. If you're on the Meryl route at this point, you'll get a call from Otagel, and if you're on his route, he'll come and talk to you face to face. The main idea of both of these scenes is the same though. Otagel decides to stop focusing so much on his losses and start moving forward with his life. And then he says this.
Snake, I'm a complete person now.
Yeah, that's how people speak. Writing good dialogue is certainly not easy, but you really should be able to avoid writing ridiculous shit like this. The idea behind Otagel's story is that you shouldn't let yourself be consumed by your losses. Otagel fucked up by allowing his desire to create a bipedal robot to blind him to the fact that it will most likely end up being used as a weapon, and he could also do nothing to help the person he loved, Sniper Wolf. Just like his grandfather, he could suffer with guilt for his mistakes for the rest of his life, but he realizes that that will be a mistake in and of itself. So he decides to stop thinking about what he lost in the past so much and starts taking action so he can be the man he wants to be in the present. After that, we'll get on a car and hit the gas so we can get out of Shadow Moses before it gets nuked. The cool thing about the timer is that if it runs out, nothing will actually happen, since the colonel already took control of the mission back and called the bombing off. This turret section really isn't great though. It works good as a cinematic way to end everything off, but it's pretty bad gameplay wise. Finding a consistent way to avoid damage before you get on the car and before Liquid starts chasing you requires a lot of trial and error and a lot of precise positioning and movements, so if you're not a speedrunner, the amount of HP you have for the Liquid fight will be partly dependent on your luck, which can be frustrating and is pretty unfair. One thing that you can do here is use the second controller to move these guys out of the way. I don't know why you can do this, and I'm not even sure if it was intentionally put in the game, but since this section is not very good anyway, it really doesn't matter that you can just make these guys fuck off. As for the Liquid fight, you can easily get through it without taking damage until he starts driving side by side with you. The only way to prevent his bullets from hitting you here is to shoot him almost exactly after his invincibility frames end, which is impossible to do consistently because it's mostly dependent on luck. This means that if you have bad luck on extreme, you just die without ever being able to do anything about it. It's not so brutal as to require more than just a few attempts at most, but it's not good that the final gameplay section of the game is a luck-based turret section. Even just the sound of that is fucking awful. Ultimately though, we make it through. At the end, Meryl and Snake survive, and Liquid seemingly does too. The idea of a battle-hardened soldier like Snake saying "uh-oh" is fucking ridiculous. Liquid suddenly dies from ass cancer, and Campbell calls us to tell us that he got complete authority over the mission back, and so Shadow Moses won't be getting nuked. After that, he switches over to Naomi, and Snake makes a really interesting decision here. Instead of telling her that Grey Fox killed her parents, he lies to her and tells her that he said that Naomi should forget about him and move on with her life, and that he always loved her. By doing this, Snake ensures that Naomi won't keep perpetuating the cycle of hatred that she's a part of. He essentially frees her from it. Originally, I was going to criticize this decision and the message that it carries with it, but I ended up realizing something. Snake's lying about what Grey Fox said, but in a way, he's honoring Grey Fox's true wishes. I don't think that he really wanted to destroy the only positive memories in Naomi's past by telling her that he killed her parents. I think that what Snake ultimately ended up saying to her might have been closer to his true feelings on the matter. I also think that that's why Snake is okay with lying to her about it. After that, that Snake brings a fox die. Okay, listen, I really wanted to talk about MGS1 only within the context of its predecessors and not its sequels, but I don't really have a choice here. Every fox die related review and retcon in MGS2 and 4 fucks with this scene a lot, and I would be able to ignore that if only I didn't think that some of it was actually there from MGS1. I'll keep the sequel talk to a minimum though. All you really need to know is that in MGS2 it turns out that Nastasha Romanenko wrote a book about Shadow Moses. In that book she says that she got a disc that contains everything about the Fox Die project. The information on it shows that Snake was indeed targeted by Fox Die, but Naomi set the activation time for the Fox Die in his blood to a wildcard value, which means that even she wouldn't know when it would kill Snake. She apparently thought that having Snake know that he can drop that at any moment, but never know when that moment will come, will be the best method of revenge. MGS4 kinda retcons this whole thing, but we'll talk about that some other day. My theory is that the wildcard value thing that was revealed in MGS2 was actually the intended interpretation of Naomi's words in MGS1. It's this line specifically that makes it plausible to me. She wouldn't say this if she didn't want to imply that Snake's Fox Die doesn't make him too dissimilar from any normal person, whose time may turn out to be up at any given point in their life. I'd say that Naomi's refusal to give a straight answer supports this theory too. At this point in the story, she isn't holding a grudge against Snake anymore, so she wouldn't want to torture him by not telling him about Fox Die's activation date. So the only reason for her to not tell Snake about it would be that she herself doesn't know. That's why she just tells him to live. She then monologues about how she came to realize that her understanding of genetics was ultimately wrong, which leads us to the ultimate message of the game. The predetermined aspects of your life, such as your genes or the environment you were born in, can determine only the choices that you have, not the choices that you make. And you really need to make sure not to mix those two up. That's what Liquid ultimately did. He thought that having the genes of a soldier who enjoys killing means that it's his destiny to always be one, which is why he wanted to create a world in which soldiers like him are always honored and valued. It's Snake's character that acts as the ultimate answer to that idea. He's tasted the exhilaration and the thrills of war, and his genes predispose him to enjoy it and be good at it. But he doesn't let those things determine his future. He recognizes that despite those things being ingrained into him at this point, he can still choose to live a different life, and that's what he does. Riding off to his new life with Meryl, Snake proves that Big Boss and Liquid were wrong. A soldier doesn't always have to be a soldier. As long as you're willing to, you can stop perpetuating the same cycles and stop letting the things that you can't change determine who you are. Because ultimately, it's all up to you. After the credits roll, we get to hear a phone call between OCELOT, who was apparently a double agent, and what turns out to be the third Big Boss clone and President of the United States, Solidus Snake. I'm fucking done with this shit.